remarks and include extraneous materials on H.R. 3.
Without objection. For purposes, the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 19, I call up the bill H.R. 3 to approve the Keystone XL pipeline.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 3, a bill to approve the Keystone XL pipeline.
Pursuant to House Resolution 19, the bill is considered read. The bill shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure and the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Schuster, the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. DeFazio, the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Whitfield, and the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone, each will control 15 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Schuster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
I enthusiastically rise today to support H.R. 3, the Keystone XL Pipeline Act. And for those who have not heard, according to the administration, the final hurdle has been removed, and that is that the Nebraska Supreme Court this morning has approved the pathway for the pipeline, the routing of the pipeline, the Keystone XL pipeline. Again, the administration has said that was the major hurdle. It has fallen. So I hope the president is not going to establish another hurdle, that being himself. America is undergoing an energy renaissance, and the prospect of securing North American energy independence is in sight. However, to achieve our goal of energy security, we need to make sure we have the infrastructure in place to keep pace with the changing energy landscape. Keystone will be a critical addition to the nation's pipeline network, increasing our supply of oil and helping to reduce its cost. The State Department completed its environmental analysis a year ago. However, there's still been no action by the administration on the pipeline. There is simply no reason to delay this important project. And as I mentioned, as the president's main arguments in this premature veto threat is that the bill would authorize the pipeline despite uncertainty due to ongoing litigation in Nebraska. Well, that uncertainty has ended this morning, and the Supreme Court of Nebraska has allowed the planned route to go forward in Nebraska. Again, there is simply no reason to delay. In fact, the southern leg of the pipeline has already been built. In March 2012, in Oklahoma, the president expressed his support for expediting construction for the southern leg of the Keystone pipeline. And I agree with the president when he stated at that ceremony that he was directing his administration to cut through red tape, break through bureaucratic hurdles, and make this project a priority to go ahead and get it done. It was the right thing to do then, it's the right thing to do now, and it's exactly what this bill does. We should move forward because this pipeline will be a tremendous boon to the economic development and one that doesn't require a single federal dollar. The very nature of infrastructure improvement creates jobs, and Keystone is no exception. And I know my colleagues have made the argument that it's only temporary, but every infrastructure job is a temporary job. When a road's completed, when a bridge is completed, when a pipeline's completed, those construction workers move on to hopefully other construction jobs. And indeed, 5 unions representing over 3 million workers, and I repeat that to my Democratic colleagues, 5 unions representing 3 million hardworking Americans support this project. And I'd like to submit their letter in the record for support of this project.
Without objection.
But I want to name them off. It's the Teamsters. It's the International Brotherhood of Electric Workers. It's the Labor's International Union of North America. It's the operating engineers. It's the pipe fitters in the United States and Canada, all supporting this project. Again, they see it as positive economic impact. And again, when these jobs are completed, they'll move on to other, hopefully, construction jobs. But what's left behind will have a positive impact to our economy, to job creation for a generation. Our energy renaissance is helping make North America more secure and energy independent. And in fact, the president, I want to quote the president, in this time of significant political uncertainty in key oil-producing countries and regions, and in the context of a difficult economic situation, non-OPEC Canada crude oil supplies advance the energy security of the United States. Now, I wish he would have said that about this pipeline, but he didn't. He said it in 2009 about the Enbridge pipeline, which started transferring oil sands from Canada to the Gulf Coast last month. The president 5 years ago supported this type of thing. He should support it now. So other than politics, I don't understand why he hasn't approved this project as he did with Enbridge. It's time to build. Ladies and gentlemen, my I especially look to my Democratic colleagues. Let's put down our gloves. Let's do something positive for America, for those 3 million union workers that are out there supporting this. Let's do what's good for the environment. Let's do what's for energy independence. And finally, let's be fair to our greatest friends in the world, our Canadian neighbors. They allowed us to build a pipeline across their land. We should allow them to do the same in ours. They are our best allies. They're our greatest friends. They're a great neighbor. And so let us today pass this bill and build the Keystone Pipeline. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Well, it's Groundhog Day come early to the floor of the House. It's cold enough, I guess, for Groundhog Day, but this will be the 10th time in the last 4 years that the House of Representatives has moved this bill with the assertion that somehow it leads us to energy independence, energy security, lower prices at the pump. Well, the reality is a Canadian corporation is going to build a pipeline from Canada to Texas. They are going to be exempt from paying into the oil spill liability trust fund, unlike most other projects in this country because of a stupid ruling by the IRS, but that's nothing new regarding tar sands. So they'll be exempt from paying into that. So if this thing bursts, there's an accident, the taxpayers of the United States get the bill, not the taxpayers of Canada. They don't get the bill. Taxpayers of the United States get the bill. Now, that's one of a number of problems regarding this project. It's somewhat unprecedented, I believe. This may have happened at some other time in American history, but I do find it particularly ironic today when we had the reading of the Constitution that the effect of passing this bill, if it were to become law, and the President has already said he'll veto it, but if this were to become law, would be to give a foreign corporation the right to take private property from American citizens. I'm not aware of any other time in the history of the Union where we have given a foreign corporation the right to take Americans' private property. And yeah, some people were happy to sell the rights, but many others weren't, including some in Nebraska and some in Texas. It's been quite contentious among landowners who are just having this corporation come. I would like to put in the record a letter from TransCanada. We have blacked out the name of the recipient of the letter, but it is a true copy of a letter to a person who will have their private property taken by eminent domain by a foreign corporation. And the foreign corporation informs them that they will begin proceedings this month, I guess because of the anticipated Republican action, to take their private property away.
Without objection.
Thank you. Now, that's a bit ironic, again, on the day we read the Constitution, and also of the party of individual rights for property owners. So that is also of concern. Yes, there will be construction jobs, and you know, I'm the first to admit we need more jobs in America. In fact, I voted against the President's so-called stimulus bill because it didn't invest enough in building infrastructure in this country. Instead, it did a whole bunch of stupid tax cuts because of Larry Summers, a highly acclaimed hack economist. And we didn't put a lot of people back to work. 7% went to infrastructure, that created jobs. 42% went to tax cuts, didn't create jobs. But that's another agenda the Republicans are pursuing, is tax cuts to create jobs. But we won't get into that here today. So yes, that will happen. But there are a lot of other investments we could, and I believe the chairman supports making that will create significant construction and infrastructure jobs. Now, were this just in isolation and it didn't involve the total destruction of the boreal forests of Canada, if I were a Canadian, I'd be pretty upset about that. And perhaps the dirtiest, most environmentally problematic way of extracting fossil fuels from the ground to get these oil sands, the construction jobs might have, might carry the day. But sometimes you have to draw a line. And in this case, we also hear it's going to lead somehow to energy security. Well, that's interesting because the crude is going to come down without paying any to crude tar sand oil or whatever you want to call it. is going to come down to Texas without paying into the oil spill liability trust fund, creating a potential problem for the future taxpayers of the United States. Go to a refinery in an export zone in Texas, and yeah, it'll be refined, and then it'll be exported. We are exporting millions of gallons of fuel every day. So to somehow say this is going to lead to lower prices at the pump in America, maybe it's lower prices in the pump in China or I don't know where else, Japan or someplace, but it isn't going to be here because the product is ultimately going to be exported. So it's also not going to do anything for our energy security. And at the moment, we have kind of a surfeit because of fracking and other things of fuels, and prices are down considerably. So, those are just a few of the problems. And we are, by passing this bill, the House of Representatives will attempt to preempt the executive authority of the President in this matter because this pipeline crosses an international border. The President has authority, and the State Department has been considering it. And even with the Supreme Court in Nebraska refusing to make a judgment, they didn't uphold the law of the Nebraska legislature. In fact, 4 out of 7 judges, normally a majority most places, said it was unconstitutional. But Nebraska has a peculiarity that if the other 3 judges take a walk, which they did, then even though a majority found it unconstitutional, it's not found unconstitutional, and that's the end of the proceeding. So that's the big news out of Nebraska. They need a little work on their constitution, I think. But so it hasn't received a stamp of approval there. There are still aggrieved landowners in Nebraska who object to the route and who are going to have their private property taken by a foreign corporation. So other than that, it's a great idea. And with that, I would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before I yield to the gentleman from New York, I just want to remind my Democratic colleagues, well, first of all, I'm from Pennsylvania. Punxsutawney is several miles outside of my district. That's where Punxsutawney Phil resides. So I'm somewhat knowledgeable on Groundhog Day. And I just want to point out to my Democratic colleagues, in the movie Groundhog Day, Bill Murray learned from his mistakes the day before and improved his situation each day. So hopefully today your references to your learning from yesterday and how we can move forward. And I think the Nebraska situation improves the whole situation for all of us. And I certainly don't question the wisdom of the Supreme Court of Nebraska Supreme Court. And with that, I yield a minute to Mr. Hanna.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of this bill. Pipelines, as Vice Chair of the Pipeline Subcommittee, pipelines are the safest single way to transport liquids, safer than rail, safer than trucks. The State Department says Keystone would have a minimal impact on the environment. President Obama and his administration have confirmed that Keystone will create thousands of construction jobs. These are men and women's livelihoods. Respectfully, I'd remind the administration, but by their nature, all construction jobs are temporary, and it is insulting to marginalize the value of these jobs or the people who might hold them. Keystone is supported by many unions, including mine, 545, the operating engineers, where I've been for almost 35 years. Prime Minister Stephen Harper of Canada, and I agree, said that the Keystone is in both our nation's interests, and that, quote, the logic here is overwhelming. Keystone will help stop sending billions and billions of dollars overseas to our enemies, many of whom would harm us. Mr. Speaker, it's time to start building this Keystone pipeline.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Oregon.
Yep. I'd reserve for the moment. I'm just straightening out could you tell me how much time remains of the 15 I had?
Each side has 9 minutes remaining.
Okay. All right.
Gentleman from
well,
Oregon
then
reserve.
with that, I would yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Grijalva, the ranking member of the Natural Resources Committee.
Gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. DeFazio. And Mr. Speaker, I rise today in opposition to what can only be described as an earmark for a Canadian corporation. It speaks volumes about the Republican agenda as this new Congress convenes that the first order of business in the House and Senate is to rubber stamp the Keystone XL pipeline. We have not dealt with unemployment benefits that the American people need that has lapsed for more than a year. Millions of Americans are suffering from a low minimum wage and income disparity, but we're not helping them. Women in this country earn 77 cents for every dollar to their male counterparts, but we're not dealing with that. We're trying to end that disparity. Instead, they're forcing Keystone through without the proper approval process. Building a pipeline clear across the United States so that TransCanada can sell its dirty tar sands oil to the highest bidder, namely China, is not in the American people's best interest. We take risks to our lands. The American people face threats to their health, and TransCanada gets to reap the rewards. That's not a winning formula for our country or the economy. In fact, it's a sham. And yet the Keystone XL pipeline continues to be sold to the American people on blatantly false pretenses. We are told by proponents that this is the panacea for job creation, yet not a single independent analysis supports these claims. The burden of proof is on the GOP. They pull fantastic claims out of thin air and yet refuse to back them up. Instead, we are told to take those assertions at face value. But here's what we actually know. These are the facts that can actually be substantiated. The State Department found in its supplemental environmental impact study of Keystone Pipeline that it will generate less than 2,000 jobs a year for 2 years, and only during the period of construction. Once the pipeline is built, these jobs will disappear, leaving a mere 35 permanent jobs that will result from this project. 35. To put that in context, under President Obama, 353,000 jobs were generated in November and a total of 2.9 million in 2014. There's also the claim that it's going to lower gas prices for American people. Please. Gas prices have been dropping for more than 100 straight days and are at the lowest level in more than 5.5 years. They won't go any lower by allowing oil to be piped across our country just to be sold abroad. In contrast to these fantasy impacts on gas prices, the potential impacts on our environment are very real. Not only will burning these tar sands add to global climate change, but any leak or failure and, God forbid, explosion will have disastrous impacts on our environment. And that's because tar sands importers are exempt from paying into the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund. American taxpayers will have to bear the cost of any cleanup of any spills. The public needs to know these facts, and that is why allowing 1 hour and not a single solitary amendment today robs the American people of a full debate and discussion. On top of all that, this bill is being pushed through despite the fact that it violates not one, but 2 treaties with American Indian nations. What does this say about the respect for the rule of law? If Republicans truly want to generate jobs for the American people, they should fully fund the Highway Trust Fund and support the Grow America Act to invest in the crumbling infrastructure all across this country, not helping Canadians build a superhighway for their dirty tar sands oil. We would not be just supporting 2,000 jobs per year for 2 years, but millions of jobs for American families across every congressional district. My colleagues, we have a chance to take an important stand today in this Congress on behalf of taxpayers, the environment, Native American communities, and the rule of law by supporting President Obama's veto and rejecting this toxic giveaway to a foreign corporate oil interest. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Minnesota, I just want to say there have been 15 hearings on the Keystone Pipeline. This is the 10th time we've debated it on the floor. This quite possibly could be the most debated piece of legislation in the history of Congress. I don't know that for sure, but I do know that it's been out there for 2,303 days, and 60% of the American people support it, while 20% don't support it. So I think the American people are fully aware of what's going on here. They understand it, and they do support it. With that, I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Minnesota.
The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Chair Schuster. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of the Keystone Pipeline, which will safely move 300 million barrels annually, strengthen our economy, continue to decrease our dependence on Mideast oil, and support thousands of jobs. This body has shown tremendous leadership on this issue, and last year passed bipartisan legislation to approve Keystone for the 9th time. Today, with strong support from unions, businesses, and the American people, we must pass it again. I'm grateful for Representative Kramer, Chairman Schuster, Chairman Upton, and leadership for their work on this vital legislation. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Time yields back. Gentleman from Oregon.
Yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Gentleman just referenced safely transport. Of course, that's a hypothetical, and let me give a real example. In 2010, a Canadian company, Enbridge, had a pipeline burst in Marshall, Michigan. 1 million gallons of tar sands oil. Now, here's the thing. Oil has viscosity and other characteristics. The thing about tar sands oil is it doesn't float. It goes right to the bottom. They are still dredging Canadian tar sands oil out of the bottom of the Kalamazoo River 4 years later. And so far, claims of $53 million have been made, which will have to be paid by American taxpayers against the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund, and not by Enbridge, the Canadian corporation, which is what we're setting up here. An even greater transshipment by a foreign corporation, exempt from paying into the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund, creating even bigger potential for spills with this oil, which has unique characteristics which are much more difficult to clean up if it comes in contact with water, and God forbid it get into the aquifer in one of the states that are being transected. The chairman did reference the 14. I don't know, we have a difference in counting, but let's say 14 hearings. 3 were in the Rules Committee. Those aren't hearings. That's sort of a little star chamber where you take things before you bring them to the floor of the House. You don't discuss substance there. 1 was in the Senate. And that would leave, there were 10 in the House, but not a single one of those hearings was in the principal committee of jurisdiction, which would be the Transportation Committee. And of course, the bill that was marked up by the Transportation Committee in the first session of the last Congress was very different than the bill that is being advocated for today, which has not been marked up. And we heard a lot about regular order, read the bill, and all that stuff. And it's fine to say, gee, we voted on this a lot of times before. 61 new members of the House. Gas prices are down by almost 50%. A lot of things have changed. I would even wonder about the viability of this project. I did just recently learn the Koch brothers, though, have a significant investment in tar sands in Canada, but that probably has nothing to do with an attempt to expedite this project. With that, I would reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Before I yield a minute to the gentleman from North Dakota, I would just like to remind the distinguished ranking member on the transportation and arguably the most knowledgeable man in Congress when it comes to transportation issues. Many years of service plus an intellect that's very sharp. I would never presume to tell him anything. I just want to remind him that the safest way to move product, to move oil, is by pipeline. And I think the gentleman knows that. I just wanted to remind him of that. And with that, I yield 1 minute to Mr. Kramer.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the chairman for yielding. And I just heard a word that is almost hard to believe. We've been accused of expediting this process. Ladies and gentlemen, this is day 2,303 of this process. It is time now. It's time because it's good for jobs creation. It's time because it's good for the environment. It is the safest, not just the safest way, as the chairman says, but the most environmentally sound way to move oil sands is in a pipeline. It is good for national security. It is good for economic security. It is good because 62.8% labor force participation is the lowest since 1978. It creates jobs. And for these reasons, not only does the majority of the United States House and the majority of the United States Senate support it, it's for these reasons that the vast majority of the people of the United States support it, including the people of Nebraska. And for those reasons, I urge a yes vote on H.R. 3. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Oregon.
At this moment, I'd reserve. We're waiting for a minute.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I recognize the gentleman from Texas for 45 seconds, Mr. Poe.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 45 seconds.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, the permitting for the Keystone Pipeline has taken longer than it took for the United States to win World War II. Isn't that lovely? The pipeline will bring oil to my home state of Texas, and pipelines are the safest way to transport oil. The Keystone will deliver as much oil as we get from Saudi Arabia. The United States should work more with our neighbors, our normal neighbors, Canada and Mexico, to develop our national resources and compete with OPEC. This is a national security and an energy security issue. We can make the Middle East, its politics and its oil and its turmoil irrelevant. It's time to pick a horse and ride it. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oregon.
I yield myself. Can I inquire again as time remaining on both sides?
Gentleman has 2.5 minutes remaining.
Okay. I yield myself 30 seconds.
Gentleman is recognized.
In response to the transport, yes, pipelines are generally safer, but the consequences, look at the case in Michigan, when a pipeline goes, are generally much greater volumes. Even in the horrific train accidents we've had, the volumes were relatively small that were spilled, even though the consequences, particularly in the one in Canada, were very, very damaging. So, and for a company to be exempt from, minimally you should have added to the bill requiring them to pay into the oil spill liability trust fund. That would make this slightly less objectionable.
His time has expired. Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I recognize the gentleman from California for 1 minute.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Chairman on railroads and pipelines.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of H.R. 3, the Keystone XL pipeline. This bill is based on the Cassidy-Keystone bill, which passed the House last Congress on a bipartisan vote of 252 to 161. As Chairman Schuster noted, this pipeline will create jobs, enhance our energy independence, and strengthen our national security. This is a bill that makes numerous project benefits a reality. According to the Department of Energy, the pipeline will transport over 800,000 barrels per day of oil from Canada to the Gulf Coast, which will help reduce reliance on more hostile nations. Some have argued that the oil will just be exported, but the administration's own environmental analysis denies that that will ever occur. It'll also create good-paying jobs now while promoting the growth of our energy economy for the future. This is the most studied pipeline in our history. In the history of our nation, we've never studied a pipeline like this. There's no need to continue to stall its approval. This project will be safe.
Gentleman, 15 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized for another 15 seconds.
America currently has 2.6 million miles of pipeline, providing an extremely safe way to transport energy products. The Keystone Pipeline will be the safest ever built, with 95 special mitigation measures, including nearly 60 recommended by the Department of Transportation. It's time to approve this project. We can't afford any more delays. The American public deserves these jobs, and we deserve to be energy independent. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Oregon.
I would yield the gentleman from New Jersey a minute and a half.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for a minute and a half.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know that building the Keystone pipeline will create some jobs. We can even help lower consumers' prices. But many of these jobs are temporary, which is true in most capital cases anyway. The price of oil has already fallen below $50 a barrel for the first time since 2009. But we really got some good news about jobs today. Again, we added 252,000 jobs. The unemployment rate is the lowest since 2008, I think May or June of that month, of that year. While we're going in the right direction, we need some serious creation of jobs and at least a handout to the administration, not a handout, but a reach out to the administration that, hey, you're doing a pretty good job on this, on oil prices, on gasoline prices, just a little bit of encouragement. We are all on the same ship. Come on. So you boost our energy security and having consumers money at the pump. But the debate over Keystone has become a symbolic issue. Come on, let's admit it. It is clear that this fight is vastly greater than the economic, environmental, or energy impact. It's the end of the world if you listen to the extremes of both sides. I could support the construction of this pipeline, but do not believe Congress should circumvent the administrative review. And, Mr. Speaker, let me just recommend something, perhaps through you to the chair, that I believe that the reason why we have this problem is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has nothing to say about oil lines. They do on gas lines, but not oil lines. I think we'd have saved a lot of time if we used the same situation. I'm going to vote no on this, but I think there's some good things that need to be done and can be worked out. Thank you.
Time has expired. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
It's now my privilege to yield to a Nebraskan, to the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Smith. 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the chairman and thank you for the time. As you all know, a major portion of the Keystone XL pipeline will run through Nebraska's 3rd District. Nebraskans overwhelmingly support this project to improve access to North American energy and decrease the strain on our overwhelmed infrastructure system. And, as we all now know, the Nebraska Supreme Court has upheld the process as established by the elected Nebraska officials. I urge my colleagues to support approval of this project, and I urge the President to sign off on the pipeline as a needed step to encourage private investment in infrastructure. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Oregon. That is correct. 30 seconds.
I would.
Gentleman reserves.
May I inquire how much time I have?
The gentleman from Pennsylvania has 4 minutes remaining.
It's now my privilege to yield to the gentlelady from Virginia, Ms. Comstock.
1 minute. Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of H.R. 3, the Keystone XL pipeline. This bill is about good-paying jobs and energy security. Republicans and many Democrats agree on this, as well as the unique coalition of unions like the Teamsters in LiUNA, the Tea Party, as well as the Chamber of Commerce. Listen to what the president of LiUNA said, quote, "To the tens and thousands of men and women in the construction industry, this isn't just a pipeline, it's their mortgages, college tuitions, car payments, and food on the table. And for our country, this isn't just a pipeline, it's a lifeline to family security, energy security, and national security." Mr. Speaker, I encourage my colleagues to vote for the passage of this critical bipartisan bill. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Oregon reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Gentleman from New York, Mr. Reed.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the chairman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of this legislation to authorize the building of the Keystone pipeline. It's time. Enough is enough. We agree. Thousands of jobs will be created by this pipeline. This will improve consumer prices. This will bring stability to oil markets around the world. This will contribute to protecting us here on American soil rather than relying on energy sources from hostile nations of the world. It doesn't cure all the problems, but it's a step in the right direction. Our constituents sent us here, Mr. Speaker, to solve problems. This is part of the solution. I rise in support of the Keystone pipeline and ask all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to reaffirm the bipartisan message of the last Congress and approve this legislation today. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oregon reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Bouchon.
Gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong support of the Keystone XL pipeline, the most studied pipeline in American history. After 6 years and 22,000 pages of review, the President's own State Department tells us that construction of this pipeline will support over 42,000 good-paying jobs and do nothing to harm the environment. And pipelines have been shown to be the safest way to transport oil. Keystone has bipartisan, widespread support, Democrats, Republicans, industry leaders, and labor. Unfortunately, the President issued a veto threat, putting the wishes of environmental activists ahead of creating jobs for the American people. Mr. Speaker, let's say yes to much-needed jobs and approve the Keystone pipeline without any further delays. I yield back.
Yields back.
May I inquire as to how much time I have left?
The gentleman from Pennsylvania has 1 minute.
I'm
sorry, 1¼ minutes. The gentleman from Oregon has 30 seconds.
I'm ready to close if the gentleman wants to close.
Gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
We're exporting more than 60% of the oil that we produce every day, either as refined or even as crude product. In this case, Canadian oil, exempt from a tax, will flow through the United States to a refinery, will be processed and exported overseas, and somehow that's going to lower prices further at the pump. Somehow that's going to lead to American energy security. Those arguments, those are kind of, you got to blow the dust off those. They're a little dated. So we've raised a number of concerns here today. Minimally, the Republicans should require this Canadian corporation to pay the same tax that most U.S. corporations pay when they transport products through pipelines and not put American taxpayers at risk.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The final hurdle has been removed. Nebraska Supreme Court has said that the Keystone Pipeline can move forward. That should be enough for my Democratic colleagues. But there's more. It's safe. It's the safest way to transport this oil, this natural resource. It's studied, the most studied pipeline. It's going to be safe, environmentally sound. It'll protect the environment. It creates jobs. And don't listen to me. Listen to the 5 unions that represent 3 million workers. 3 million union workers say the Keystone Pipeline should be built. It provides energy security for us. It's good for our economy. It helps our allies. It strengthens our allies, and it weakens our enemies. And the last point is it's fair to our best friends in the world, the Canadians, who've allowed us to build a pipeline from Alaska to the lower 48. We ought to return the favor to our best friend, our best ally, and say, yes, you can build a safe pipeline. You can build a pipeline that'll help all of North America, that'll help all of our allies around the world and weaken our enemies. So with that, I urge a yes vote on H.R. 3, and with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the Energy and Commerce Committee has shared jurisdiction over this issue with T&I, and we have a number of members that would like to speak on the issue as well. And at this time, I would like to recognize for 2 minutes the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton.
Gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Do you like cheap oil? Most Americans would say yes, and a number of us have strongly pursued a North American energy independent plan for years, and our friend Canada is a big part of that. In August of '09, President Obama signed off on a new pipeline called the Alberta Clipper. Guess what? It brings 400,000 barrels of oil a day from Western Canada to the United States. We've been waiting for the approval of the Keystone XL pipeline for years, over 6, in fact. I remember well when President Obama promised to do whatever it takes to create American jobs. That was followed by a so-called year of action. Yet here we are, 6 years later, nothing's happened. By the administration's own estimates, tens of thousands of jobs will be supported by this landmark project. Bringing oil from Canada to the U.S. displaces imports from Venezuela and the Middle East. Isn't that a good thing? Also note that former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton signaled that she was inclined to support the project, and that was way back in 2010. In fact, in the summer of 2011, the White House issued its first veto threat against congressional action on the Keystone XL, claiming that legislation was unnecessary because their process was working, and a decision would be reached by the end of that year. Since then, we've upgraded new oil and gas pipeline standards, and Keystone will exceed those, as Mr. President, as it should. We used to be a nation of big ideas and big dreams. We imagined building the Hoover Dam and the Golden State Bridge and accomplished both in far less time than it has taken the President to muster the courage to simply say yes or no. We can do better. The election, Mr. President, is over. There has been broad bipartisan support for this project from the very first day. The president has been hiding behind the Nebraska court case to block the critical jobs project called Keystone XL. And with that contrived roadblock cleared, the White House is now out of excuses. Vote yes.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to yield to Mr. Green for a unanimous consent request.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to place a statement in the record in support of H.R. 3.
Without objection. Gentleman from New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself 5 minutes at this time.
Gentleman is recognized.
Today, Mr. Speaker, we're voting once again to grant special treatment, and I stress special treatment, to TransCanada's Keystone XL tar sands pipeline. It's the 10th time since Republicans took control of the House. American families face many pressing problems, and they want us to use this new Congress to work together to solve them. Unfortunately, we'll begin this new year with a bill crafted solely to help the Canadian tar sands industry. The administration issued a statement in opposition to this legislation and indicated that the president will veto the bill. I heard my Republican colleagues talk about the action or inaction, whatever it was, by the Nebraska Supreme Court today, but I would stress that the White House press office still says in a statement that regardless of the Nebraska ruling today, the House bill still conflicts with longstanding executive branch procedures regarding the authority of the president and prevents the thorough consideration of complex issues that could bear on U.S. national interests. And if presented to the president, he will veto the bill. So the bill will still be vetoed by the president, which is another indication why we're wasting our time today. Mr. Speaker, oil prices are at their lowest level in more than 5 years. Gas prices are now below $2 a gallon. Domestic U.S. oil production is skyrocketing. Tar sands are among the dirtiest and most carbon-intensive of all fossil fuels. Approving the Keystone XL pipeline will create a dependence on tar sands crude, reversing the carbon pollution reductions we have been working so hard to accomplish. According to some experts, building the Keystone XL pipeline will triple production of the tar sands, and that's totally inconsistent with any future scenario for avoiding catastrophic climate change. We don't need this oil, Mr. Speaker. Approving and constructing this pipeline won't lower gas prices for Americans. In some areas, it may even raise prices. This pipeline is a terrible deal for the United States. We get all the risks, while the oil companies will reap all the rewards. I was at the Rules Committee the other night, and all I kept hearing was how wonderful Canada is, how we have to help Canadian companies, how, this is all about Canada. Well, frankly, I don't know why we're so worried about a Canadian corporation. It wasn't even clear during the Rules Committee, based on the conversations and debate we had with the Republican side, that this pipeline would even ever be built. And yet here we are rushing to basically say to the president, we don't care what you or the State Department or the Department of Interior say about what's in the national interest. We're just going to go ahead and do this because of some Canadian interests. Mr. Speaker, this is a new year and a new Congress. We have new members who will vote on this bill without the benefit of any hearings or markups or floor amendments, without the benefit of learning how our changing energy picture alters the need for this pipeline, and without considering whether our time might be better spent on efforts to promote other cleaner energy sources. We need sound energy policy in these challenging times. As the ranking member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce, I'm anxious to begin working with all of my colleagues on pragmatic energy policy. But we need a balanced energy policy, one that takes into account current circumstances, one that takes into account our need to combat climate change, and one that works with the president rather than against the president to actually deliver legislation that the president can sign rather than veto. This legislation doesn't meet any of these criteria, and so I urge my colleagues to vote no on this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Kentucky.
This time I would like to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Texas, Mr. Olson, a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank my chairman and friend. Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I speak today as a former naval aviator who flew alongside Canadian Armed Forces as we won the Cold War. We have no greater ally than our neighbor to the north, Canada. we were attacked on September 11th and went to war in Afghanistan, they went with us. To date, nearly 200 of their precious sons have come home in coffins. That is a true ally. When Katrina hit New Orleans in August of 2005, within 3 days, our neighbor to the north authorized 3 military vessels, a Coast Guard vessel, numerous planes, 25 military divers, and tons of tents, blankets, beds, water, medical supplies. That is a true ally. And yet this strong alliance is being weakened dramatically because President Obama has chosen to listen to a small group of wealthy radicals who want no drop of oil coming from our neighbor to the north, Canada. In November, I met with elected officials from Canada, officials from all over, from Leeds, Grenville to Nova Scotia. They were dismayed because we're telling them, we don't want your oil. Don't help us. Send that to China.
Yield the gentleman 30 more seconds.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
It's a bad world, Mr. President. Terrorists in Paris, ISIS, terrorists here hitting our country from North Korea. We need strong allies. Pick up 2 things, Mr. President. Today, the phone, dial from Mr. Harper and say, I'm going to approve this pipeline. When it passes the Senate, pick up that pen, sign this bill into law. Let's have a strong alliance with Canada forever. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair would like to remind all members to direct their comments to the chair. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield now 3 minutes to the ranking member of the Energy and Power Subcommittee, Mr. Rush.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 3 minutes.
I want to thank the ranking member. Mr. Speaker, I strongly oppose this bill, and I strongly disagree with this abhorrent process that the majority side has undertaken in order to hastily bring H.R. 3 to the floor after only 1 hour of debate and denying the minority the ability to offer not one single solitary amendment. Truth be told, Mr. Speaker, it is unclear how this legislation will actually be a benefit to the American people. A 2014 report by the State Department concluded that the Keystone pipeline will create 35 permanent, full-time domestic jobs, which is roughly the same amount of jobs that will be created by opening a new corner fast food burger joint, although with more risk to the American environment. And furthermore, Mr. Speaker, this bill is unnecessary because there is already an independent process that is taking place at this very moment. And H.R. 3 short-circuits this approval process. And furthermore, Mr. Speaker, let it be fully understood by all members of this House, the President has indicated that he would veto this bill. This bill is dead on arrival if it ever reaches the President's desk. The State Department has already released its final supplemental environmental impact statement, and has begun the review period to determine whether the pipeline is of national interest. Mr. Speaker, more than 2.5 million Americans have contributed comments on how this foolhardy project will impact the national interest, and their voices, the voices of 2.5 million Americans, deserve to be heard. I said it before, Mr. Speaker, and I say it again. This bill is about seizing power away from the American people. Could I have 30 seconds?
I yield the gentleman another 30 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
This bill is about seizing power away from the American people by seizing power away from its duly elected president. It will prevent the thorough, sober consideration of complex issues that will have serious security, safety, environmental, and other ramifications. Mr. Speaker, I urge the members of this body to vote no. Mr. Speaker, the Keystone Pipeline is a Republican pipe dream.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished majority leader, the gentleman from California, Mr. McCarthy.
1 minute.
1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, as we stand on the floor debating a bill to approve the Keystone Pipeline, we all need to admit we shouldn't be doing this. We should not have to be here today. 2,303 days after the application for Keystone first submitted to the State Department. We shouldn't be debating it. We should be building it. For years, approval has been stuck in the Senate. Well, now, the Senate is open. The Senate has changed. It moved through committee. Mr. Speaker, for the longest time, the President hid behind the lengthy and delayed review process, saying he wanted to wait to make a decision. He said he was waiting because of environmental and legal consideration. But Keystone won't harm the environment. It'll help protect it. The people know that. Mr. Speaker, the President knows that. Mr. Speaker, the President, before we even started the debate today, has submitted a threat of a veto. I take these serious as a majority leader, so I wanted to read it. Mr. Speaker, it says one of the rationales why the President wants to veto is because this bill also authorizes the project despite uncertainty due to ongoing litigation in Nebraska. Well, hallelujah. We got good news for the President, Mr. Speaker. The Nebraska Supreme Court solved that problem for him today. So we should move forward just as we have done before on a bipartisan basis. Why? Because 42,000 jobs. Those are American jobs created here. An economy continuing to move forward. And rest assured, the oil in Canada will be produced. The question before us today, will that oil move down through America, refined in America refineries built by American women and men, or will it go to a whole nother continent? We take up many issues here on this floor, but we have to look to the future. And we have to build for a future and a strong future. I want North America to be energy independent. We all know the strength of that. I want an environmentally sound way to do it. Today does it. I listened to the President's concerns, Mr. Speaker. We've had 2,303 days. We've studied it, Mr. Speaker. Our departments have studied, and they've came back and said environmentally we're safe. There was a legal concern. Well, the Supreme Court dealt with that. So today we can join together, just as we've done before in a bipartisan manner, pass this bill a new change in the Senate with an open process, pass it there, and go to the desk and be signed so 42,000 Americans could get back to work. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield now to the gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welch, a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee.
The gentleman from Vermont is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the heart of this issue are two questions. First, is climate change real? Is it a threat to our economy, to jobs, to our environment, and to our security? Speaking for Vermont, climate change is real. In the past 5 years, Vermont's had 10 federal disaster declarations from severe weather, including Tropical Storm Irene that did nearly $1 billion worth of damage. Our farmers, ski area operators, and maple sugar producers are all trying to contend with the changing climate. Also,
Hello, everybody. Hey, thank you.
metric tons of carbon emissions. And the second question is this: should Congress now, or should Congress ever, pass a major piece of legislation without any committee hearings, particularly when that legislation is only about oil going through our country, not to our country? And this legislation includes a special provision that exempts a foreign corporation from contributing to an environmental cleanup fund all our domestic corporations are required to pay into. On the issue of jobs, these are good jobs, about 2,000 jobs. But if this Congress would do its job, we would pass a surface transportation bill that would create 200,000 jobs and put those 3 million men and women in our labor unions to work on good things that are going to rebuild this country. Mr. Speaker, this is the wrong bill. It's passed in the wrong way and at exactly the wrong time. I urge a no vote and yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Kentucky.
This time I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the Vice Chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, the gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Blackburn.
Gentlelady from Tennessee is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the chairman for Kentucky for his tenacious work on this issue. This is the 10th time this has come to the floor, and he's been diligent and has continued to push it, and we thank him for those efforts. I have to tell you, listening to this debate, it just goes to show you why the American people are so tired of what they consider to be the political games that are played here in Washington. They said they wanted us to come and get some things done. This is getting some things done, and it's appropriate that we take up this bill today, and here is why. Do you realize 88% of all Americans support energy independence? 88%. 65% of all Americans think that building the Keystone Pipeline is what this country should do. Now, I have to tell you, I listen to the President and to the excuses that come out of the administration, and I think with the Supreme Court decision in Nebraska today, the President is out of excuses. He is out of excuses. He has run the gamut on it. No more excuses. It is time that we pass it, the Senate pass it, and that this legislation go to the President's desk. One of my colleagues said that being here on the floor today is a waste of time. I really disagree with that, Mr. Chairman. The President vetoing this legislation is a waste not only of the American people's time, but of the resources and the taxpayer money that come into the coffers for this government to function. Create 20,000 new jobs. Increase our energy supply. Move us to energy independence. Pass the bill. Yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, can I inquire how much time is available on both sides?
Gentleman from New Jersey has 6 minutes. The gentleman from Kentucky has 7.5 minutes.
I yield now 2 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This bill is a labor economics jobs bill. The American people need jobs. The labor unions who founded and built the middle class of this nation need jobs. But ladies and gentlemen, nobody needs jobs like young black men. I see this as an opportunity here today. The highest unemployment rate is with black young men. Black young men between the ages of 19 and 35, the unemployment rate is 38%. 38%. And in some communities, it's 50%. That's why I come before you today. I support the bill, but I want you all to help me support an amendment. You all know the amendment process is going on over in the Senate. And over in the Senate, Senator McConnell said he's open to amendments. Here's the amendment. The amendment would just put language in this bill that would put the apprenticeship programs, what they affectionately call earn as you learn, on-the-job training, no federal money, and target those and guide and direct and encourage in this language that our labor union partners bring in these young African-American men to learn these trade building skills. Each of the labor unions already, they have the apprenticeship programs. They have them there. We need this desperately, ladies and gentlemen. Do you know that sitting in the prisons right now are 1 million black men? Every week, thousands of our black men are going into prison. The number one reason, they don't have jobs. This is a jobs bill. Yeah, it's got maybe some people say 4,000, some people say 2. But there will be other jobs that they can learn these skills from when we rebuild our infrastructure. You all have seen the signs.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Black lives matter, but black lives with jobs. Help me get this amendment in on the Senate side, and let's pass this bill. Thank you.
The chair lays before the House an enrolled bill.
H.R. 26, an act to extend the termination date of the terrorism insurance program established under the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act of 2002 and for other purposes.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
This time I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Bost, for 1 minute.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of House Resolution 26 and the construction of Keystone XL pipeline. Part of the existing pipeline system actually supplies the Wood River Refinery in the 12th Congressional District in Illinois. In anticipation of the construction of this pipeline, the owners have spent $4 billion upgrading the facility and created about 2,400 jobs over a 4-year period. Construction of the Keystone XL and the extension would deliver similar benefits to other regions of the country, creating over 42,000 jobs in construction, manufacturing, transportation, services, and service industries. It is for this reason that diverse coalitions of business and labor unions in the construction and building trades industries have come out in support of House Resolution 26. And I encourage all of my colleagues to do the same. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Davis.
The gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, how does this one project, the Keystone XL pipeline, get so much outsized attention? We currently have a sprawling 185,000-mile network of oil pipelines in the United States and a regulatory process to ensure that they are operating safely. So why are we spending so much time trying to exempt a Canadian company from the environmental reviews that every other company in America has to abide by? And the big question, Mr. Speaker, who will pay for any future oil spills? Not Keystone. This bill exempts Keystone from contributing the same 8 cents per barrel that every other oil company is required to pay into the Oil Spill Trust Fund. Tell me, Mr. Speaker, why is this? If the authors are so certain that this pipeline does not carry any environmental risk, won't they allow the review process to run its course? I stand with my colleagues. I want those jobs. I want them around the country. We can do this. We can do better. I urge a no vote on this dangerous precedent, Mr. Speaker.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Kentucky.
This time I'd like to recognize the distinguished gentleman from Illinois, a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Mr. Shimkus, for 1.5 minutes.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 1.5 minutes. Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Also, I want to say congratulations again to my friend, Congressman Pallone, for assuming the ranking position. We look forward to working with you. Today is a great day. This pipeline should have been approved 6 years ago, like so many other transnational pipelines in our history. A pipeline is the safest way to move bulk liquid product than any other means. Will be from an ally, a trusted ally. More crude oil on the world market lowers prices for everybody. It's more money in the individual citizens' pockets. It actually is a very great day. Let's just debunk this myth. This oil is going to go to refineries in my district, Mike Boss district, Ohio, Indiana, and in the Gulf Coast. So we're going to get the double effort because we're going to be able to refine this, put it on the U.S. market, lower energy prices for all our citizens. It's a great day. Thank you, Chairman, for bringing it to the floor. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, I want to make sure we still have 3 minutes on our side.
That is correct.
I yield 2 minutes then to the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Maloney.
The gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition. We've been promised thousands of jobs, but the U.S. State Department estimates that this will create only 35 permanent jobs. Yes, there'll be construction jobs, but they're not permanent. They're for a year, maybe 2 years. But let's be clear about what we are getting with Keystone. A dirty and dangerous pipeline running through the heart of our country, which will help Canadian oil companies export their oil to and it happens to be the filthiest possible energy form. I would like to say that if we put the same time and energy into a transportation bill as we have to this Canadian pet project, we could upgrade our crumbling roads and bridges, expand our mass transit system, provide a huge boost to the American economy, and create jobs in almost every single congressional district in this country. Thousands and thousands of permanent jobs in our good country. We don't need another pipeline dividing our country, polluting our water, pushing us closer and closer to the climate tipping point. A transportation overhaul will actually create jobs that Americans can live off of. Keystone will not. Unless what they're considering with these jobs are just the 35 permanent jobs, and maybe they're considering that there'll be jobs to create the leaks and the pollution and treat the pollution associated and illnesses that may be associated with the pollution. So I urge a no vote. We should invest in American companies. We should invest in American pipelines. We should invest in American jobs that are here in America for Americans and are permanent. Again, the State Department estimates that there will be only 35 permanent jobs. So what are we getting? No jobs and pollution from the dirtiest oil source and energy source that is on the earth at this point. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Speaker, would you explain to me again the amount of time on each side?
The gentleman from Kentucky has 5.5 minutes, and the gentleman from New Jersey has 1 minute.
Okay. At this time, I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Harper, a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, for 1 minute.
The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Here we are again, working to pass a bill to approve construction of the northern portion of the Keystone XL pipeline. Again, with the facts on our side. Again, with bipartisan support in both houses of Congress. And again, under threat of a veto. But with the new Republican majority in the Senate, the president just might get to make good on his veto threat this time. And we should force him to make that decision. I urge my colleagues to support this job-creating, North American energy-producing, bipartisan, labor union, and Chamber of Commerce-supported shovel-ready project. The American people asked for H.R. 3. We've waited long enough. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, I would reserve until my colleague from Kentucky is ready to close.
The gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Kentucky.
At this time, I'd like to recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Rouser, for 1 minute.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I've heard more than one person say common sense isn't so common anymore, and boy, isn't that right. Well, today we have a unique opportunity to pass common sense legislation that will truly help the American people and strengthen America. I am proud to co-sponsor H.R. 3, the Keystone XL Pipeline Act. It's projected that this pipeline will create more than 40,000 good-paying jobs, and it will create far more jobs indirectly by increasing our energy supply. At a time when our families are struggling to make ends meet, it's irresponsible for the president to walk away from doing what's right for America. Building the pipeline will help us achieve energy independence. This is an opportunity to strengthen our position in the world, eliminate a key revenue source for our enemies, and strengthen our economy by lowering fuel prices even more. I urge my colleagues in both chambers and the president to support the Keystone Pipeline Act. This is an opportunity to show the American people that there is still a glimmer of hope for good old common sense. Mr. Speaker, I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey reserves. Gentleman from Kentucky.
At this time, I'd like to recognize the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Russell, for 1 minute.
Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Speaker and Mr. Chairman. As a combat veteran, we should never have to fight for something that we can so readily produce here. Why should we put competitors in leverage over our economy and give them dollars to use against us? We hear a lot of talk from progressives on the environment, Mr. Speaker. Imagine a life without petroleum, no cell phones, no asphalt for roads, no synthetic clothing, no plastics. On what do progressives suppose we run our magnificent nation and lifestyle? Perhaps their answer is sweet bubble love and rainbow stew. I yield back. Thank you, Mr.
Gentleman
Speaker.
yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky.
I think we have the right to close, so if the gentleman from New Jersey would like to proceed.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New Jersey.
I yield myself such time that remains, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the Keystone XL pipeline moves us in exactly the wrong direction, enabling production of the dirtiest crude oil on the planet to expand and increasing our carbon pollution for decades to come. And we still have a lot of work to do to cut our carbon pollution and avoid catastrophic climate change. The concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere just hit 400 parts per million for the first time in human history. Although this administration is making great progress, we're far from achieving our pollution reduction goals, and the need to act is more urgent than ever. I would urge my colleagues to vote no. The president is going to veto this legislation. It's just a political exercise at this point. And again, it bothers me that I hear so much from the other side about trying to help this Canadian company. We should be concerned about the United States, and we should be concerned about the world and the environment that results from climate change and the continued production of greenhouse gases. My concern and the concern of the president is that this is simply not legislation that has been proven to be so far in the national interest. And the president is just asking for more time to make that determination. Vote no.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Kentucky.
And how much time is remaining?
The gentleman from Kentucky has 2.5 minutes remaining.
2.5 minutes. Well, I do want to recognize Mr. Kramer of North Dakota for 30 seconds, and then is that okay to do? Would that be, is that okay with, okay. You want to go ahead?
The gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the chairman for yielding. I just wanted to address a couple of things. First of all, I'd like to place in the record, if possible, Mr. Speaker, a letter I received from the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council and Caterpillar.
Without objection.
And with that, I just want to address the climate change issue because I think it's an important issue to a lot of people. The argument that the other side makes is based on the false idea that somehow oil sands isn't going to be developed without the United States. It is. Moving anything by rail is 1.9 times more the emissions of CO2 than moving it by pipeline. Moving it by truck creates 2.8 times the CO2 emissions as moving it by pipeline. Moving it by barge to China is priceless. With that, I yield back.
His time has expired. The gentleman from Kentucky.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
In conclusion, I would like to point out a couple of things. First of all, this was a significant issue in the last election, just a couple of months ago. This is a piece of legislation about the American people, not a Canadian oil company. 72% of the American people in polls say they support this legislation. This is about jobs for people in America who need jobs. This is about increasing the energy infrastructure of our country. This also is a project that would not include one dime from the federal government. It's going to be a cost of approximately $7 billion of private funds that will create a lot of jobs, make us less dependent on foreign oil. The application for a Keystone pipeline was filed in September of 2008. There are 2.6 million miles of pipelines in America. Most of those pipelines do not have to be approved by the President of the United States. But in this particular pipeline, since it crosses into the country of Canada, from Canada to the U.S., the President must approve it. And he has said that one reason he's not going to approve it is because of litigation in Nebraska, which ended today in favor of the governor of Nebraska, who supports this pipeline. The second ostensible reason for the President to oppose it is CO2 emissions. And yet the Secretary of State office under Hillary Clinton and Mr. Kerry, in their final supplemental environmental impact statement, have said on 3 occasions it will have minimum impact on the environment. So today we want to pass this legislation once again for the American people. The U.S. Senate said that they will pass it, and we would ask the President to join us and sign this legislation, and I would urge the passage of H.R. 3.
All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 19, the previous question is ordered on the bill. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to approve the Keystone XL pipeline.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
The gentleman opposed to the bill?
I am.
The gentleman qualifies. The clerk will report the motion.
Mr. Garamendi of California moves to recommit the bill H.R. 3 to the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendment. At the end of the bill, add the following. Section 3, requirement that TransCanada Keystone Pipeline, LP, pay for any oil spill cleanup on American soil. In the approval process authorized under this Act, TransCanada Keystone Pipeline, LP, shall certify to the President that diluted bitumen and other materials derived from tar sands or oil sands that are transported through the Keystone XL pipeline will be treated as crude oil for the purposes of determining contributions that fund the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund.
Reserve a point of order.
Point of order is reserved. Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his motion.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to offer an amendment to this bill. Passage of this amendment will not prevent the passage of the underlying bill.
If it is adopted, my amendment will simply be incorporated into the bill, and the bill will immediately be voted upon. Mr. Speaker, I don't know if a question is appropriate, but is this February 2nd? Is this Groundhog Day? I'm curious. This is the 10th time this bill has been before the House. And those who are in support would argue, enough is enough, let's pass it and get on with it. Those of us in opposition would say, well, why haven't you written a bill that is sufficient to the problems raised by the pipeline? Specifically, for 10 times on this floor and even additional times in committee, the issue of the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund has been raised. We have raised that issue 10 times. It's been debated here on the floor. I've heard 5, 6 people speak to that issue. The chairman of the committee are well aware that this bill has a huge loophole in it, allowing one company that owns a pipeline to avoid paying into the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund. Why in the world would we move a bill that allows this company, unique among all others, to not participate in a very, very important part of the protection of communities and the environment? The Kalamazoo issue has been raised here, the spill, over $60 million having been spent, of which paid for by the Oil Spill Liability Fund and then reimbursed by the pipeline company. Let's do something right. I mean, this is great fun, back and forth, back and forth. We kick this thing around. We may get some political points on one side or the other, but why in the world don't we write a decent piece of legislation? Why don't we do it right? Why would we exempt one company among all of the others of hundreds of pipeline companies and allow this one Canadian company? And I love Canada. My son-in-law is a Canadian. This is about doing what's right. This amendment would simply include this company being required to participate in the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund. It's a lot of dollars. It's about $24 million a year. That's a pretty good tax break. Who among us would not like to have that tax break? I don't see any. Well, I guess we're all going to stand up because we want to have it. The rest of the story is this. We have spent an enormous amount of time on this issue when, in fact, as has been said here many times by proponents and opponents, we ought to get on to real infrastructure. Consider the time spent on this issue when you consider the time that has been spent on transportation bills on this floor. Consider the time that we must spend figuring out how to pay for repairing our bridges, building our highways, our ports, our airports. Consider that time. 10 times this bill has been here. 10 times this House has ignored a tax break that is not warranted, has allowed to move forward to the Senate a bill that in its very substance provides an unwanted, unnecessary, and grossly unequal tax break to one company among all the other pipelines. This amendment simply comes to the point of making sure that this pipeline company, like every other petroleum pipeline company in America, pays its fair share of the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund, which is essential. And I see some of my friends from Michigan here. You know how important this is. The Kalamazoo River, a big deal. $60 million thus far and more to come. The Oil Spill Liability Fund was there to provide the early money for the cleanup. It's important, folks. My colleagues, this is important. Let's do it right. This is our 10th time. Let's do it right. Adopt this amendment. We clear up one problem in the bill. We remove one point of opposition. And we do what's right. I ask for your aye vote.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
I would ask for the 5 minutes in opposition to the motion to recommit.
The gentleman withdraw his reservation.
I withdraw my point of order.
The point of order is withdrawn. Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the motion to recommit, and I would just say that to all my colleagues, our side, we certainly view this as a procedural issue, not as a real amendment. I would say that in the markup that we had on this bill in earlier years, I pledged to work with Ms. Capps on our committee to find a solution that would be fair to the bill. I support the concept of what the gentleman is doing, but in fact, I sent a letter in 2012 to then Chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Dave Camp, asking for help on this, and we were hoping that we would see tax reform, comprehensive tax reform, and this would have been included as part of that. But that did not happen. We didn't get tax reform. So as this bill comes forward, a review does have to be made in terms of how to treat crude oil derived from oil sands for the purposes of the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund. But I have to say that really is a Ways and Means issue, not a transportation issue, not an energy and commerce issue. Now, I know that this issue is going to be raised in the Senate with an amendment probably in the next week. I would just say to the gentleman and those that support this idea, I look forward to working with our Senate colleagues, Republicans and Democrats, as well as Republicans and Democrats in this body, to in fact address this situation that does need to happen. But as a motion to recommit, we shouldn't do it now. So let my Democrats friends vote yes. I would urge my Republicans on this side to vote no. I just want to give them the assurance that, in fact, as this bill moves into the conference, as what I expect to happen, that I certainly intend to see an understanding go forward. Not at this point. I would yield to my colleague, the chairman of the Transportation Committee.
I thank the gentleman, and I'm in agreement with the chairman of Energy and Commerce. This is again something to be dealt with on a tax bill. Two things, though, that good have happened today. One, the Nebraska Supreme Court has removed the final hurdle to move this bill forward. And number two, my good friend from California and I agreed today on something. This thing should be dealt with, but this is not the place or the time to deal with it. And moving forward, we want to make sure that this is dealt with in the proper way, and I believe that the Ways and Means Committee will do that. I'll yield.
Thank you so very much. I have enormous respect for the two of you, and this issue has been before us many, many times. If we wait for a comprehensive tax reform, the tar sands may be totally eliminated and used up. We have an opportunity
reclaiming my time.
Thank you for the yielding.
Reclaiming my time. We understand that this will not be part of a comprehensive tax reform bill. We need to act earlier than that. With the Senate now passing a bill in all likelihood next week, likely with an amendment addressing this situation, we can deal with it as part of that conference report, and I look forward to supporting that and the inclusion of such in the final package. And I would again urge my colleagues to vote no on the procedural motion to recommit so that we can get to final passage and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Without objection, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The motion is not agreed to.
Mr. Speaker, I request the ayes and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of passage of the bill. This is a 15-minute vote.
The House wraps up debate on approving the Keystone XL oil pipeline. This is the motion to recommit vote. 15-minute vote and final passage will be next. And we'll open up our phone lines and get your thoughts on the Keystone debate. 202-748-8920 for Democrats, 202-748-8921 for Republicans, and for independents and all others, 202-748-8922. Lauren Gardner covers energy issues for CQ Roll Call and joins us on Capitol Hill. The whole debate as the House began today was changed by the fact that the Nebraska Supreme Court ruled on Keystone. What did they have to say?
Hi, Bill. Thanks for having me. So the Nebraska Supreme Court upheld the state law today that gave the governor the authority to approve TransCanada's proposed route through the state. So they didn't address whether that was constitutional under state law, but as of right now, that law has been upheld. So that gives the White House the standing to go forward with the review at the State Department.
Tell us about some of the dimensions of the pipeline. How big is it? How much oil will it carry per day?
The pipeline, well, the bill on the floor right now would approve the northern portion of the pipeline that is yet to be built, and that is about 875 miles long. That would extend from the Canadian border in Montana through Nebraska. And it would send hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil per day, mostly from the oil sands in Alberta, but it would also send some of the oil that's being produced in the Bakken Shale Formation in the United States as well.
In terms of Congress, the debate next moves to the U.S. Senate. They approved it in the Energy Committee yesterday, and moving on to debate next week in the Senate. Senate back on Monday at 2 o'clock Eastern. We look for a series of votes at about 5:30. A tweet here from Maria Cantwell, opposed to the Keystone Pipeline. She says unusual that the U.S. Senate has been asked to vote on a bill setting a pipeline through U.S. simply because Canadian company wants us to do so. When the Senate takes up their measure, how much different will it be? How much different could it be from what the House debated?
Well, the Senate debate will be different in that they'll be considering amendments, and Senator McConnell has promised an open amendment process. So we can expect to see bill supporters trying to garner up some support for amendments that are seen as having a lot of bipartisan backing. So anything from energy efficiency to maybe even liquefied natural gas exports. But you'll also see Democrats bring forward ideas for trying to get Republicans on the record on how they think human activity impacts climate change.
Lauren Gardner covering energy issues for CQ Roll Call, and you can reach her on Twitter too. Follow her on Twitter, Gardner_LN. In fact, you tweeted about the Nebraska decision. Landowner plaintiff in Keystone XL case. It's time for the president to put an end to this damn thing. How does that change the dynamic of the president's decision? Nebraska Supreme Court says they can move forward. Assuming the Senate passes it, what's next with the White House?
Well, with the Nebraska decision coming out today, that just means that it takes away one of the reasons why the White House has said that it's not making a decision yet on the pipeline, because there was no legal route through Nebraska. So now that state law has been upheld, the State Department can now ask federal agencies across government to submit their comments on the national interest determination to them. So it'll still be at least a couple weeks yet for agencies to do so, but we're expecting that process to get back underway now.
A 15-minute vote on the House floor. This is the motion to recommit. Final passage on Keystone is next, and let's get to your calls with Lauren Gardner staying with us at least for a little bit to hear from you. Wendell, North Carolina. James, thanks for waiting. Go ahead.
Yes, I was watching the proceedings on your show, and I found it hilarious that the Republicans were talking about how they are so much in agreement with certain unions. And everybody knows that they are not for unions. So I wonder, after all this is over, are they going to still be in support of the unions?
Well, I'm sorry, the labor argument has been that's been a big argument by business groups for why this should go forward, and that, you know, labor unions tend to have a lot of support for Democrats, and that's a reason that's something that Democrats should take into account when considering where their position should be on this issue.
To West Sacramento, California, this is Brian, Republican line. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, how you doing? I agree with the pipeline. You know, the only thing I differ a little bit on is I would like to see them contribute into the funding, you know, in case there is a leak. But the thing that bothers me the most is you keep hearing the Democratic side talking about what only gives you jobs for a year or two. I know people that are unemployed, and working for a year or two is good, not to mention the training that you may get to go to another job or something later on. So I hate to hear that constantly. What only gives us work for a year or two, and, you know, that's a year or two that someone's going to be employed.
The jobs argument has been very central to this debate as well. You're right, that's been a big argument by Democrats that a lot of these would be temporary jobs. And a lot of them would also be indirect jobs like food service or other services companies that would be supporting any of the construction jobs on the pipeline. So,
and about jobs, Mike Kelly, congressman from Pennsylvania, tweets just a short while ago, today the House will vote to pass the Keystone XL pipeline. Mr. President, no more excuses, time to build. And they list in this chart 42,000 jobs. How much easier, or does it make it easier, now that Nebraska's ruled on Keystone, does it make it easier for Democrats to vote in favor of it?
That's something that we're going to see play out in the next couple of weeks as this debate plays out in the Senate. That's an open question, but I think that most Democrats have decided where they are on this issue. Certainly there are interest groups, especially environmentalists, who want to make sure that Democrats who have previously indicated they don't support this pipeline aren't going to change their minds. But it remains to be seen, but Democrats generally have staked out their positions on this. So it'll be interesting to watch to see if anyone changes their mind.
And here's Rick in Rogue River, Oregon, Independence Line. What do you think, Rick? How do you feel about the Keystone bill?
Well, I support the pipeline, and I do think that they ought to be able to put an amendment in there to contribute to the disaster fund, such as it is with the 8 cents a gallon or 8 cents a barrel. I've made my living for the last 14 years off of working in the service industry for the Alaska pipeline. And it absolutely amazes me how these people can spout out that there's only 35 possible jobs that are long-term. There are thousands of people working from the 70s up on the Alaska pipeline. There's people who have retired just on that one project. And it seems that they don't have any actual idea of how many people it would take to run a pipeline that long. It's not like you just put oil in one end and it comes out the other. There's pump stations along the way. There's, as I said, I work in the service industry. I'm a food service provider. And there's good long-term jobs there. And it's much safer to put oil in a pipeline than ship it across the sea from Saudi Arabia or OPEC nations who really don't care for the way our Western lifestyle.
And that your comments get to another major argument that's come up here, especially by supporters of the pipeline, that they say the oil is going to get to market anyway. It's just going to find other pipelines, or it's going to move on train, or it's going to move on barge down a river. So that's an issue that supporters have definitely seized upon in this debate.
Next up is Renee, who's in Pullman, Washington, as we talk to Lauren Gardner from CQ Roll Call about the Keystone vote that's underway. Go ahead, Renee, you're on the air. Hey, Renee, I'm just going to put you on hold there with a reminder to make sure you turn down your television or radio, and we'll get back to you in a second. In West Virginia, in Weirton, West Virginia, it is Richard on the independent line. Go ahead, Richard.
I just want to add my 2 cents to what your former independent caller stated, because he has the experience on the Alaskan pipeline. I have talked with my own senators Manchin, Capito, and McKinley, and basically I am in favor of the pipeline with the proviso that they do pay into the disaster fund. And I suggested the idea of what I referred to as a transport tax, which is a small tax based on the number of units you move through the pipeline, and put that towards the deficit. And that ought to soften the idea of the objectors. And that's all in thinkbig.us/ideas/18936 and 19768.
Lauren Gardner, on that disaster fund, there was a little talk about that at the end of the debate. What's involved with that?
Well, the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund is a fund that helps pay for spill cleanups. And the way the law is written right now, oil sands doesn't fall under the definition of crude oil. So that's been an issue that Democrats especially have seized upon in this debate for a very long time, that that they think that oil sands producers should have to pay into it. Now, if this were to come up in the Senate debate, you also run into an issue of tax legislation not originating in the House as it's required to do. So we'll see how that plays out next week as debate kicks off there.
Let's go to New York, to Brooklyn, and John on our Democrats line.
Yes, good morning, and thank you for taking my call, C-SPAN, and good morning, Ms. Gardner. My question is, there was earlier a senator or representative that put a map of the entire oil distribution of the United States, and now we're going to be adding this XL pipeline to the oil distribution, and I'm sure all the oil distribution that goes down to the refineries down south actually refine different types of crude oil. The XL pipeline seems to be the only pipeline I'm hearing that's going to be refining tar sand type oil, which is, I guess, 20 times more emissions in terms of carbon emissions. If we do not do this pipeline, when Canada transports it to other countries that can refine this oil, is it that other countries do not have the same refining capabilities that the United States has? And I know transportation is a very important issue in terms of tankers and things like that, but ultimately, who's refining it other than the United States for the refineries that we have that's capable of refining tar sands versus other countries refining tar sand oil? And then the whole picture of globally adding carbon emissions to the world amount that we have right now. So that's where the complexity is to me compared to the distribution of our oil systems in the United States.
Okay, John, thank you. We'll get a response.
Well, the refining capacity in the United States, it depends on the region in terms of what type of oil they're most equipped to refine. And in the southern United States, many refiners down there are best equipped to handle very heavy viscous crude. So that includes the oil sands up in Canada, but also heavy crudes that are typically found in countries like Venezuela. And that's where a lot of the oil has come from to those refineries in the past, but supply from those countries has gone down in recent years. So that's one of the arguments that Keystone supporters have made in saying why Keystone is so important, because it brings a greater supply down to the Gulf Coast refiners that have build out the capacity to deal with that heavy crude.
You retweeted some Sierra Club support or reaction early in the debates, reaction to the Nebraska. Here's the Sierra Club tweet from just a short while ago, thanking Representatives DeFazio, Pascal, Grijalva, and Bobby Rush for speaking out against the Keystone Pipeline. How much are groups like the Sierra Club, other environmental groups, pressuring the White House to decline the Keystone permit?
They're very active on this issue. They don't seem to pass up any opportunity to make it clear to the White House that they think the president should deny this pipeline. They've made it clear today, even in light of the Nebraska Supreme Court case, that regardless of what that decision was, the ultimate decision on whether this pipeline gets built rests with President Obama, and they want to remind the White House of that this is ultimately up to them.
A couple more calls with Lauren Gardner, energy reporter with CQ Roll Call, as the House votes this afternoon on the Keystone, on approving the construction permit for the Keystone Pipeline. It's half of the equation on Capitol Hill. The Senate will get its chance next week. This has been the motion to recommit vote. Final passage is next. And this is Moscow Mills, Missouri. And welcome to Freddie on a Republican line.
Yes, sir. I appreciate you taking my call. I've got more comments than questions, but I'm for the pipeline, by the way. My family's always been Democrat, hard Democrat, and I listen to this stuff a lot. And I'm more Republican than anything else because they lie less. I guess I can say that. They lie less. They don't call the other ones a bunch of names and everything. But getting back to the pipeline. The climate change, there's no proof in climate change. We've had bad weather ever since time began. So they haven't proved that. Matter of fact, when they've brought up spills or different things that cause infiltration of oil in the water and all that stuff, they've run into problems because they've sabotaged the test. But anyway,
I believe that there's going to be jobs, security, and good for the economy. And one more thing, I believe they ought to contribute to the spill fund, whatever that is, get that worked out. But
okay, Freddie, we got your several points there. Lauren Gardner, any response?
The climate argument has been probably the one that's gotten the most attention in terms of the opposition to the pipeline. There's a question among many energy experts as to whether this pipeline actually would significantly exacerbate global climate change, and that's the president has made that question has made it very clear that that question is going to underpin at least part of his decision. So the opponents of the pipeline say that it definitely would, because it would lock in the United States to decades of moving oil through the pipeline, because infrastructure is not a 1 or 2 year deal. It lasts for decades, and supporters say that in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter because the oil is going to market anyway.
To Kansas City, Kansas. Mike's on the Independence line.
Well, as a person that worked on the railroad for 10 years, every year the railroad has derailments with coal, oil tankers. So by having the pipeline, this is going to reduce that by having the pipeline instead of relying on oil tankers to the railroad. The majority of the American people support the pipeline. It creates jobs. I'm very disappointed in Democrats saying that they don't want this because it creates jobs that they don't agree with. In this kind of economy, where we have millions of people out of work, jobs are jobs.
Lauren Gardner, I want to bring you back to the politics of the debate with the White House for a second. Jeff Mason, who covers the White House for Reuters, tweeted a short while ago, the White House says the State Department is studying the Nebraska court decision on Keystone XL pipeline. White House will let that process play out. So assuming that the president follows through on his veto of this legislation, what's that process and how long could that last?
Well, the State Department process, it includes soliciting comments from other federal agencies about the pipeline. It involves looking into several different areas in terms of what could make up whether this is in the national interest. So foreign policy implications, presumably climate would play into that as well, and some other issues in that regard. Now, on timing, it's unclear exactly how long it will take for this to play out, but given where state was in the process before they extended the comment period for federal agencies, it could be at least another few weeks before they release a record of decision on where they're standing on the national interest determination.
We're under 100 vote here, so let's get a couple more calls. This is Keller, Texas. Quick comments. Joe on the Democrats line.
Yes, sir. Calling in I'm very strongly against the Keystone pipeline, and I just heard one of the Democrats mention something that the American people really need to think about. How can a foreign country take our land by eminent domain? And I would also like to educate the American people, and I would like to really give the people that are opposed to the pipeline some fuel to stand up against it. I would like for the American people to look up a website called Claire Conner, ClaireConner.com. And then I would like for them to research a book called The Battle for Baptist Integrity by a man by the name of John F. Baugh. And then I would like for you to research the John Birch Society. And when you research the John Birch Society, also study a man by the name of J. Frank Norris.
Well, it's a plate full of homework there. We appreciate your comments and input, Joe. Any last thoughts, Lauren Gardner, as the House vote begins to wrap up here?
Well, given the decision today, opponents of the pipeline, both on climate grounds and on the landowners' issues that was just brought up, they're going to be redoubling their efforts to ensure that Democrats in the Senate, who have previously said that they oppose the pipeline, stick to those positions. But given the open amendment process that's going to play out in the Senate, it remains to be seen whether pipeline supporters can woo a couple more Democrats over to their side. So that's what we'll be watching.
The number of Democrats who intend to support it in the Senate, where's that stand?
Well, right now they have 60 sponsors on the bill, and Senator Hoeven has said that there are 3 additional Democrats that have indicated their support, and that aligns with the Democrats that they convinced last Congress to support the bill that ultimately failed in December.
Well, we appreciate you joining us for the conversation. Viewers and listeners can follow you on Twitter, Gardner_LM, and read your work at CQ.com and at rollcall.com. Lauren Gardner, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
As the U.S. House winds up this motion to recommit vote, the final passage on the Keystone Pipeline is next. A reminder, the Senate takes up the measure next, their version of the Keystone bill. They're in Monday at 2 o'clock Eastern, a series of votes at 5:30 on Monday afternoon.
This vote, the yeas are 180, the nays are 237. The motion is not adopted, and the House will be in order. The House will be in order. The chair would ask all members present to rise for a moment of silence. The chair asks that the House now observe a moment of silence in memory of the victims of the terrorist attacks in France. Without objection, 5-minute voting will continue. The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Gentleman, New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, on that I demand the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. Sufficient number having arisen. The yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
The House taking a moment of silence there in respect and memory of those killed in the attack in Paris. And an update, 3 terrorists who seized those hostages at separate locations today and ignited fear across Paris were killed today, along with 3 of their hostages, as the gunmen clashed with thousands of French security forces. The House moves on to final passage vote on approving the construction permit for the Keystone XL oil pipeline. It's a 5-minute vote.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland, from New York, seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to adjourn the House for 1 minute.
What's that? Without objection.
Mr. The House is not in order.
Someone is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, myself and a number of members of the New York delegation were not able to be here on swearing-in day, because we were attending the funeral of former Governor Mario Cuomo in New York. We were also not here to cast a vote for Speaker of the House. Had I been present during that vote, I would have cast my ballot for the Right Honorable Nancy Pelosi of California, and I would like the record to reflect my vote for Ms. Pelosi.
Without objection, the gentleman's statement will appear in the record. Gentleman from New York.
Yes, ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was with Mr. Crowley attending the funeral on Monday of former Governor Mario Cuomo, and therefore I was not able to be here. Had I been here, I would have cast my vote for Speaker, for the Honorable Nancy Pelosi for Speaker from California. And I want that to reflect, the record to reflect the same.
Without objection, the gentleman's statement will appear in the record.
Thank you. Yield back.
The gentleman from Maryland is seeking recognition.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to speak out of order for 1 minute for the purpose of inquiring of the Majority Leader the schedule for the week to come.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognized.
And at this point, I'm pleased to yield to my friend, Mr. McCarthy, the Majority Leader from California. Mr. McCarthy.
Well, I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, on Monday, the House will meet at noon for morning hour and 2 p.m. for legislative business. Votes will be postponed until 6:30 p.m. On Tuesday, the House will meet at 10 a.m. for morning hour and noon for legislative business. On Wednesday, the House will meet at 9 a.m. for legislative business. Last votes of the week are expected around noon. On Thursday and Friday, no votes are expected. Mr. Speaker, the House will consider a number of suspensions next week, a complete list of which will be announced by close of business today. In addition, the House will consider H.R. 186, the Regulatory Accountability Act, authored by Chairman Goodlatte. This bipartisan bill will modernize the regulatory process, ensure transparency, and reduce overly burdensome costs that are hurting job creators across the country. The House will also consider H.R. 37, promoting...
Mr. Speaker.
The House is not in order.
The House is not in order.
What's that? Shh. Gentleman is current. The House will be in order. Gentleman, California.
I yield to my friend from California.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. The House will also consider H.R. 37, Promoting Job Creation and Reducing Small Business Burdensome Act, authored by Representative Fitzpatrick, which includes bipartisan reforms to reduce red tape and ensure that small businesses have access to the capital they need to grow. Finally, the House is expected to consider legislation to fund the Department of Homeland Security and respond to the President's unconstitutional executive action. I thank the gentleman. I yield back to you.
I thank the gentleman for the information he's given us. First, Mr. Speaker, I want to congratulate the Majority Leader for bringing to the floor in a timely fashion the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act, which we passed overwhelmingly in a bipartisan fashion. I think that was very, very important that we get that through the House early. As the Majority Leader knows, the Senate has already passed that bill and is on its way to the President. That obviously will raise the confidence level of those who are going to create jobs and enter into construction projects, very important for our economy and for our communities. So I thank the Majority Leader for his quick action and leadership on that issue. Mr. Majority Leader, Mr. Speaker, I'm hopeful the Majority Leader can inform us of what form the Department of Homeland Security appropriation bill will come to the floor. And what I mean by in what form, the committee bill obviously is, I think, supported. I don't think, I'm positive, will be supported almost unanimously on both sides, certainly on this side of the aisle unanimously, if in fact it is the funding levels that resulted from the agreement between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party and passed overwhelmingly, known as the Ryan Murray budget numbers. The committee marked up its bill, reported it out, was included in the omnibus, but it was included, as the gentleman knows, only until February 27th. Can the gentleman tell me whether that will come to the floor as reported out of committee? And when I say the committee, the House Appropriations Committee, or when reported out, will it be considered under a rule? And if considered under a rule, will that rule be subject and allow amendments? And I yield to my friend.
Well, I thank the gentleman for yielding. And the base bill will reflect the appropriations bipartisan, bicameral negotiations on funding for the Department of Homeland Security, the text of which will be available later today. And to answer the question, yes, the funding level will be at that. We also will consider a series of amendments which respond to the President's executive action, and I expect the text of those will be available a little later today. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. So I'm pretty sure I understand exactly what the gentleman said. Therefore, those amendments will be offered on the floor and will not be incorporated in the bill, in the base bill.
That is correct.
I thank the gentleman. Will other amendments, when will the hearing on the rule be held so that our members can know that if they have amendments they would like to offer, that they can appear at the Rules Committee? I yield to my friend.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I anticipate Rules Committee meeting on Monday.
I thank the gentleman for that. I'll make sure that our members know that. Mr. Speaker, I know the leader, the Speaker, has just held a moment of silence. I'll be saying something in a few minutes on the tragic events that have happened in France. The loss of life, not only of all loss of life, in the initial incident, in the hostage taking, and the law enforcement officer. Clearly, this was in France, but we all know that we are all vulnerable in all the free world. And I would urge the Majority Leader to ensure that the Homeland Security bill passes this House in a bipartisan fashion. And what I mean by that is, I know there are going to be amendments offered. I know his side of the aisle is very concerned and believes, and he has asserted, that the actions taken by the President were unconstitutional. We do not share that view, as the gentleman knows, that they were unconstitutional. We believe they were, the executive order was within his authority and prosecutorial discretion on the executive side of the government. But we also know that that issue is going to be an issue of substantial debate, discussion, and I'm sure other legislative actions. And, Mr. Speaker, I would urge the Majority Leader I think it is in the best interest of making sure that the Homeland Security bill is passed so there is no doubt as to the resources that the Homeland Security Department will have to protect all Americans, to protect our homeland, and to coordinate extensively. Secretary Johnson has made statements this week that the failure to have full funding for the Department of Homeland Security has already impeded his ability and the Department's ability to act fully on behalf of the security of this country. So, Mr. Majority Leader, I would urge that to be, I know all of us, all 435 of us, are committed to making sure that we do everything we can to keep our homeland safe and our people safe. And I would hope that we would have nothing included in the bill which would be very controversial, reflecting our differences, when the underlying bill, I think, is not controversial. When the underlying bill is something on which we can almost unanimously, I think, agree, is something that ought to be passed, ought to be signed by the President, and ought to give the Department of Homeland Security the full resources it needs to keep America safe, and I'd be glad to yield to my friend, the Majority Leader.
Well, I thank the gentleman for yielding, and as the gentleman knows, the current Homeland is funded up until February 27th, but as was noted, next week is the second week back in, and we're taking this up in the second week because I believe on both sides of the aisle we care about Homeland, we care about our security, and this is something that has been worked together. And inside this body, we have a constitutional responsibility to deal with those items that are germane in that, and we will deal with all the items that are germane. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and I will look forward to working with him next week to hopefully achieve the passage of a bill that will not prove controversial in the Senate or with the President of the United States, so this can be effected, as the gentleman observed, as quickly as possible. I appreciate him bringing it to the floor, and I also appreciate the fact that the amendments are going to be considered separately, and I would hope that we could join together in opposing amendments which will undermine the bipartisanship of the legislation. Can the gentleman, we have 3-day weeks coming up now. We'll have a couple of short weeks when the Republicans go to retreat to their issues conference, and then when Democrats go to their issues conference. I can ask you if you can give me a sense of the legislation that will be on for the remainder of the month. I yield to my friend.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. The gentleman is correct. We have 3 days weeks for retreats for the House on both sides of the aisle. And then this year, the Republicans will be retreating with the Republicans in the Senate as well, leaving next Wednesday. But I thank the gentleman again for yielding. The House will be very active throughout January, focusing on bipartisan solutions that have been needlessly stuck in the Senate. As the gentleman knows, 382 bills did pass this House but got stuck in the Senate. More than half of those actually even passed by voice vote for the last 4 years. This will include a bill to expedite the federal review process for natural gas pipeline permit applications, and a bill to cut through red tape and ensure exports of liquefied natural gas to our allies. As we get closer to consideration for each week, I assure the gentleman that the full list of bills coming before the House will be available for the members. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. And lastly, Mr. Leader, if I could ask you about the border security bill. It's my understanding that the border bill could be coming to the floor this month. And I know that Chairman McCall has said Republican leaders are getting close, and I'm quoting, to have a separate border policy bill ready to go. I know they, referring to the Republican leadership, want Homeland appropriations on the floor next week, as we've already discussed. And so what's going to be tied to that is unclear at this point, but we're working on a border bill right now. Now, as you know, Mr. Leader, the border bill, the McCall bill, passed out either on voice vote or unanimously, with both parties agreeing. And in fact, the Democrats in the last Congress, in the comprehensive immigration bill that we introduced, dropped the Senate border security bill and put in the McCall bill, as the gentleman undoubtedly knows, because we believe that was the better approach. Can the gentleman tell me how will the McCall bill, as passed in the last Congress, be the border bill that will be reported, or does the Majority Leader know that at this point in time?
Well, I thank the gentleman for yielding. In speaking to Chairman McCall, he does want to move a bill maybe towards the later this month. I know he has a trip to the border with a number of members. I know he'd like to move the bill after that trip, so I anticipate a bill shortly, and as soon as we have a date, I will let the gentleman know.
I thank the gentleman, and I hope that we can, as we did in the first iteration of the McCall bill, have a unanimous bipartisan agreement, because all of us want to make sure the border is in fact secure, again, as we want to see that the Homeland Security Department has its full complement of resources to protect the American people. And if the Majority Leader wants additional time, I'll yield. If not, I'll yield back the balance of my time. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Yields back. What purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet on Monday, January 12, 2015, when it shall convene at noon for morning hour debate and 2 p.m. for legislative business.
Without objection. The chair lays before the House the following personal request.
Leave of absence requested for Ms. Moore of Wisconsin for today.
Without objection, the request is granted. The chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revised extent.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to discuss the President's executive orders on immigration set to take effect in mid-2015. The Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, expressly grants the legislature the sole authority to establish rules for naturalization. Yet on November 20th, 2014, the President announced new policies that will enable a substantial portion of the unlawfully present alien population to obtain relief from removal and work authorization. In addition to substantive constitutional separation of power concerns, then the action raises national security implications and a range of other potentially harmful consequences. For this reason, in December, the House passed H.R. 83, which imposes a February 27th funding sunset for the agencies responsible for carrying out the President's orders. While this limitation creates an opportunity for the new majority in Congress to take action against the President's unilateral actions, my colleagues on both sides of the aisle should want to protect the rule of law, our Constitution, separation of powers, in the best interest of hardworking Americans. The American people deserve as much. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise as I know all Americans would rise if they were here to express our solidarity with, our sympathy to, and our convictions for strong alliance with the people of France. The despicable and tragic murder in Paris on Tuesday of journalists and those who protected them ought to be a reminder that we cannot and must not take for granted the freedoms we enjoy living in a democracy. The men and women who were targeted in Paris on Wednesday were cartoonists whose job was to use humor to make people question their leaders and their most cherished principles. Freedom of speech protected in the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America, which was read today on this floor, means nothing if that speech can be intimidated and shuttered by violence. The principles that we speak of were part of a long tradition in France and in this country of bringing the loftiest of people and ideas down to earth through the power of satire. Freedom of the press and free expression of ideas are a necessary check against tyranny and oppression. They are as much a part of democracy as the right to vote and due process in court. In attacking these journalists, the terrorists made their target clear, and that is freedom itself. Freedom in America, freedom in France, freedom throughout the world. Freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, freedom of dissent. And the taking of innocent hostages at a kosher market today further demonstrated the terrorists' utter disregard for the liberty, equality, and brotherhood that are the foundation of the French democracy and the American democracy. The democratic nations of the world must continue to stand up to those who wish to stifle the basic freedoms that all people deserve. I know that all 435 members of this Congress are united in that conviction. I join with all of my colleagues in offering my condolences to the families of the victims and to the French people. In that regard, I articulate what has just been demonstrated by all by standing in silence. Just as President Kennedy declared, "Ich bin ein Berliner," and newspapers around the world after 9/11 read, "We are all Americans." Today, all freedom-loving people around the world join together in solidarity to say, "Nous sommes tous Charlie." And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. What purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the Red Ryder BB gun is a ghost of Christmas past because this year Santa gave drones. Here a drone, there a drone, everywhere a drone. Just more eyes in the sky, and these eyes could be anywhere and on any person. How comforting is that? It is estimated by 2030, 30,000 drones will be over the skies of America. People are rightfully concerned that these eyes in the sky could be a threat to their constitutional right of privacy. We are entering a world of uncharted drone technology. That is why I am reintroducing the Preserving American Privacy Act. This bill seeks to ensure the privacy of Americans. It establishes specific guidelines for about when and what purpose that law enforcement and private entities can use drones. Technology may change, but the Constitution does not. The Christmas spy machines that have useful purposes also need constitutional rules to prevent unlawful surveillance by law enforcement or private organizations. And that's just the way it is.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Nebraska seek recognition?
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this week, the members of the 114th United States Congress took their oaths of office. Family and friends from around the country came to participate in this great American tradition of representative democracy and to support their loved ones. I was pleased that my own wife and 5 daughters were here with me as well. The start of a new Congress is always an exciting time to renew our government and the promise of America. But as we all know, we face tremendous challenges. Political dysfunction and partisan gridlock have made smart and effective government very difficult here. An arthritic economic recovery has dimmed the financial prospects of too many small businesses and their families. In our time of social fracture, more and more people are feeling directionless and alone. Mr. Speaker, as I often like to say, there's nothing wrong in America that can't be fixed by what's right in America. But this will require bold resolve, innovative public policy, and a return to our highest ideals. We must restore our economic vibrancy through responsible government, reclaiming our best traditions, and building a culture of life that respects the dignity and rights of all persons. Let's repurpose Washington. Let's turn our country around. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The administration's concessions to the tyrannical Cuban regime have only strengthened the iron grip of the dictatorship, and by President Obama attempting to normalize relations with the island, we're only putting more money into the coffers of these thugs to continue their repressive ways. The White House and the State Department were once again fooled by a tyrant, and that has grave consequences for our credibility around the world. Mr. Speaker, this is a bad deal. It is a bad deal for the people of Cuba, a bad deal for America, and a bad deal for freedom-loving people everywhere. Today, I was joined by other members of Congress in sending a letter to Secretary Kerry urging the administration to stop its concessions, abandon the talks scheduled with Cuba later this month, and get serious about bringing true reforms to Cuba first before even contemplating a change in our relations. If they won't listen, it is up to us in Congress to defend freedom for Cuba and indeed around the world. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Request to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objections, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last fall, after 34 years of distinguished public service, Pennsylvania State Representative Paul Clymer from Upper Bucks County announced his retirement. Throughout his career, Representative Clymer has been a strong advocate on many issues, ranging from education to economic development. An avid historian, Paul chaired the committee responsible for the renovation of the State Capitol building. He took a personal interest in this project, working diligently to ensure the completed renovation would live up to President Theodore Roosevelt's declaration in 1906 when he called it the handsomest building he ever saw. More than a century later, thanks in part to Paul's work, the building still strikes visitors with awe. Although he has many accomplishments to his name, it has been Representative Clymer's gentlemanly demeanor for which he is best known. Paul was known in government as a man of conviction who would stand up for his principles, yet also able to listen to those who passionately opposed him. He's been a model public servant and a mentor to many, including to me. And I want to say, well done, Paul, in your retirement. Thank you. I yield.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning, we started by reading the Constitution, and I did not want to leave this week without reminding us of Amendment 1 of the Bill of Rights, that Congress shall make no law respecting or establishing of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Today we stand with the people of France, who in the early years of our beginnings certainly gave to America many of the democratic principles by way of their own values. Today we acknowledge that violence will not undermine democratic values around the nation nor around the world. We mourn those who've lost their lives, and we want to stop the terrorist violence. But what we most want to do is to be able to acknowledge the individual dignity of all people, and that we will not stigmatize religions or ethnicities or race in this country, but we will recognize that we are great because we are able to welcome all from all places and to be able to accept their human dignity. We have a Constitution and a Bill of Rights, and I'm grateful for the greatness of this nation, but I stand with the people of France and mourn their loss this week.
The chair will recognize members for special order of speeches without prejudice to the possibility of resumption of legislative business. Under the Speaker's announcement policy of January 6, 2015, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Jolly, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the